So, guys, next two classes tonight and tomorrow night, we're going to be really digging into, I guess, what can be best described as the context of the book of Revelation and what it means for our study of eschatology. So, boy, I struggled to prepare some slides for this because if it looks like kind of schizophrenic when you see the slides in a minute, it's not intentional. Well, I'll share with you, kind of how I feel about the date of the book of Revelation and some of the just paradoxes that exist. But one thing I will not be doing tonight is be dogmatic about any particular view of the date of the book of Revelation. So there's some things you just can't be dogmatic on. I'm not going to be dogmatic on this. I shared with Kyle last week that I have fluctuated a little bit because there's compelling evidence on both sides. And ultimately what I think is important is to try to understand what it means for our study for eschatology. This class is not to convince you of a date. Because, as I said, there's good evidence to suggest both dates. But what I think is important is to understand how it connects to our study of eschatology, because we have identified ourselves using modern vernacular that we are partial preterist. We would not put ourselves in the camp of a futurist, right? At least I hope not. A futurist, we would contend that there is a future component to the book of Revelation in that the Lord's coming back. And He's going to defeat Satan. And that has not yet happened, right? Everybody's on board that that's not yet happened. That's going to happen in the future. So in that respect, I'm a futurist. But the term futurist really implies that most of Matthew 24, most of Revelation is at some point in the distant future, that most of which has not happened yet. Like for instance, we studied Matthew 24. This tribulation yet to happen in the future, abomination of desolation yet to happen in the future, Son of Man coming in the clouds sometime in the distant future. So we would contend that there's good evidence to suggest that those things are not future. Those things are, we would say those things have happened. So that puts us in the camp of being preterist. With that, let's have a prayer and let's dig into the class and we'll begin. Let's pray together. Dear Father, we're just so grateful to be together, and we're so grateful for the study. And to Father, I thank you for the eldership and for the leadership here that has allowed us to talk and think about these things. And dear Father, I just pray that by the end of this class, we all can just be more versed and we can be able to talk to others about eschatology, to not be fearful of it, but to be able to proclaim the truth, and the truth being that you are the Son of God and that you are a just God and that you're coming back. And dear Father, there's going to be a time of reckoning, and we know that, we see that. And dear Father, I just pray that we can live our lives always prepared for that great day. And dear Father, we just pray for forgiveness. We're humbled by the beauty and the beauty of your word, and it's sometimes it's great depth, and sometimes it's just great simplicity. We just thank you for that. We thank you for the challenge that we have in some places to study hard and to try to gather the truth. But dear Father, we're just so thankful for the simplicity of your word and knowing that what we need to do to follow you, what we need to do to be saved. And we just thank you for your blood that was shed for us. In Jesus' name, amen. Ultimately, if we were to step back and say, what's Revelation about? There's lots of things that we could say. And one of the things that I think of when I was saying that prayer, I wanted to articulate some of the things that I think of when I think of the book of Revelation. I think of the Lamb, and I think of a conquering Lamb. And it's almost a paradox, right? I mean, how many, you don't think of a lamb as being a conqueror, but the picture we have of the lamb in the book of Revelation is this lamb that's going to conquer. And ultimately, it's a book of hope for those who've not only suffered, but for us as well. So it's a book of overcoming. It's a book of hope. It's a book of the fact that that Jesus manifest as this perfect lamb is the only person worthy to open those seals, the only person worthy to sit at the right hand of God. And ultimately, it's a beautiful picture proclaiming the reality and the truthfulness that Jesus, in fact, is the Son of God, and he is the worthy one who is going to, he brings hope to all of those who are faithful to those, but he'll be a God that will bring judgment upon those who are not. And he's going to bring judgment upon Rome. And he's going to bring judgment upon Jerusalem. Matthew chapter 24. Son of Man coming in the clouds. That is a motif, a theological motif that indicates that he's coming in judgment. And he's going to, you think about this, you think about in history, how many times, the Assyrians, God chooses the Assyrian people to punish the northern 10 tribes of Israel. 721 BC, the northern 10 tribes wiped out by Sargon and his son Sennacherib. You see those? But God is going to tell them, I'm not going to let them get away with that. I use them as a tool, but I'm going to have vengeance upon them. So who does he raise up to do that? Who does he raise up to punish Assyria? Nebuchadnezzar in Babylon. He's going to raise that power up. And they're going to do that. And then Nebuchadnezzar he's going to use them to punish Judah. And then who does God raise up to punish Babylon? Yeah, he's going to raise up Cyrus, this great king who Isaiah prophesies is going to let the children of Israel come back out of captivity. And then he's going to raise up someone to punish the Persians, the Greeks. He's going to raise up someone to punish the Greeks, the Romans. And then he's going to punish Rome. And I believe that a lot of Revelation is God's judgment upon Rome. And so, we can certainly say that. I think I don't think there's much debate about that. There's going to be debate about who some of the surrounding peripheral figures are. But I think without question, the great beast of the book of Revelation is Rome. So, now I brought this slide up first because I wanted because we kind of finished on this and I kind of ran through it. But I think I wanted to emphasize this, and then in Matthew chapter 24, there's so much emphasis on the destruction of Jerusalem and what it means and what that's going to inaugurate. I mean, ultimately, these events are going to be surrounding the inauguration of Jesus being given the kingdom by God. Remember where that comes from? Where that reference, the prophecy that the Messiah will be given the kingdom, and he will basically be given the kingdom in heaven. Where did we go to for that? Daniel chapter 7. Daniel chapter 7 is that prophecy. So we see this, we see the destruction of Jerusalem as being this significant event. Yet, and it's so important and it's so fundamental. This is one of the reasons why so many people have a hard time with a late date Exodus, a late date Revelation, is because there is not a single direct reference specifically to the destruction of Jerusalem in the book of Revelation. So that could be for several reasons that we'll explore. One of them is that it's happened so long ago, it's not important. Jerusalem's not the central place of God's people. The temple is no longer, there isn't worship going on there. That's a very good reason to suggest John didn't mention the destruction of Jerusalem. But for those that advocate an earlier date, a pre-AD 70 writing of the book of Revelation, would have good reason for John to not reference the destruction of Jerusalem, as it hasn't happened yet. So that's one of the challenges and one of the interesting concepts behind dating the book of Revelation. But I wanted to start here because I wanted to emphasize one thing, because I didn't get to the slide, and that we can go to several verses, specifically 1 Thessalonians, that it emphasizes this idea over and over again that for yourselves are fully aware that the day of the Lord will come like a thief in the night. And that's really kind of where I think where Jesus seems to go at the end of chapter 24. Not necessarily in the other synoptic gospels, but specifically in chapter 24, that's where he seems to go after verse 35 and verse 36 and following. So I didn't show the slide. I thought, I thought that would be important, and also to ask if there's any questions before I literally pull up this very convoluted PowerPoint presentation on the. Yes, sir.
I agree with you what you're saying. I've always said there is a break. It seems like verse 36 is where that break occurs in Matthew 24, for him to shift from the destruction of Jerusalem to the second coming of Christ. But if that is the case, after verse 36, he talks about in that day there will be those that are milling, one will be taken, one left behind.
Right.
So how do we explain those passages?
Yeah. No, that's okay. So what I believe those passages are inferring is that if you look at those activities represent everyday activities. And they represent activities that are happening at different times of the day. If you look very specifically at those references. And I believe I think it could represent a manifestation of the fact that those activities are happening at night, they're happening during the day, they're happening in the morning. And just like in the days of Noah, where activities were going on, people were marrying and those types of things, I think it's following that motif of there being activities going on at all times of the day. So, the challenge in those passages about, ultimately represent an idea that, no one's going to be able to escape that event. It's inevitable for everyone. And so at least that would be my explanation. But I think we certainly can dig into that further for sure. And like I said before, it is totally okay for one to hold the view that Jesus doesn't make that shift. I don't think that defeats or diminishes what we talked about in class, before. Ultimately, the big points of Matthew 24 is that ultimately God is going to receive His kingdom. The Son of Man is going to come, and we see judgment. And we see judgment upon a city that was going to be forever and always diminished as a city and as a country, as a people. Because that's the way God judges. That's His judgment upon Israel and upon Jerusalem was going to be one of permanent duration. Forever and always would be altered because the kingdom was established. There would be no need for those things. So ultimately, there's so many important points of that from that passage, but I think that's among them. Any other thoughts or questions? Okay, all right. So there are, I think, just a couple of points, and I'm going to show a slide that will kind of put us in context. But it's as you know, and as we'll dig into further later in our class, especially when we get into the classes on ultimately understanding the symbolism and those types of things that we'll dig into and what that means for us. But it's very important to understand the Old Testament. I think we all have gathered that. How many of you really fully understood how important it was to understand Matthew 24? To understand the book of Daniel, to understand Matthew 24, right? I don't know if you've appreciated that before this class, but if not, you probably fully appreciate to understand Matthew 24, you've got to understand the book of Daniel. And to understand the book of Revelation, You really have to understand the Old Testament. You really have to understand the book of Daniel. And some people will actually say that you really have to understand the book of Joshua. You have to understand a lot of different books to understand the book of Revelation. So the date's significant, I think, because ultimately it sometimes projects the way you look at, as you look at really eschatology. And this is what I mean by that. If you look at this slide here, this gives a very good overview of kind of the two the two positions. You have basically an early date of the writing of the book of Revelation and a late date. Now, I'm going to ask you a question because you can see. So Nero, died around AD 68, and of course John, verified by multiple people, was probably in his 90s when Domitian reigned, and so obviously he would have been in his 60s. John would have been in his 60s during the reign of Nero. He would have been much older if he did write it much later in life. So we have these two proposed dates. So we have kind of the AD 90 kind of time period, and then we have an AD 68 or pre-AD 70 date. Okay, so we've got this picture here, and so here's my question to you, and this is going to make you think a little bit. But traditionally in history, which date would have been the preferred date, or is the preferred date by futurists? If you're wondering why I mentioned that at the beginning of class, it was for this purpose. So what would be the preferred date for a futurist? And what would be the preferred date for a preterist? Let's start with futurist. What would be the preferred date for a futurist? That's exactly right. A late date would absolutely be necessary for a futurist. Now, some would say that, well, it doesn't matter for a futurist because, it's all going to happen in the future. But most certainly a preterist would prefer an early date, okay? Because they would contend that much of the book of Revelation, much of Matthew 24, what? It's already happened, right? The irony is that among the churches of Christ, and especially among the churches of Christ, and among many, traditionally, members of the church have held, and I have held most of my life, and I'm not saying I don't still hold this, but have held to a late date. Not an early date. And without question, most really very firm preterists whom I read and who I have been reading and who I agree with significantly across what we've been talking about, not everything, but a lot of them, most of them purport an early date. So thus the conundrum. So what's interesting here is that we have no reference to AD 70 in either in the book of Revelation. Now, there's a reference to the temple, and we'll look at that in a minute because what's interesting is that I'm going to share with you several arguments that are posited on both sides, and some of them are pretty weak. I mean, they're not good arguments. Like, for instance, early date advocates would go to Revelation chapter 11 where John receives a vision about being told to go and do what? Measure the temple. He's told to measure the temple. Well, an early date advocate would go there and say, well, there it is. There's the temple. I think that's a terrible argument for the temple still existing, because we're talking about a book of symbolism. And how could he have measured the temple from Patmos? He would have measured it the same way that Ezekiel would have measured it when he's told to measure the temple. Did he live in Jerusalem? No. He lived in Babylon. So again, it's a symbolic reference. It's not intended to be literal, and that's where I would find that's what I would term a very poor argument for an early date. Any points or thoughts on that?
I don't see how you can claim that most of Revelation is figurative
Okay, yeah, so Revelation, yeah, so specifically with respect to measuring the temple. And so what they would say is that, well, just even the reference of the temple, I don't think that many would say that God was asking him to literally go and measure the temple. But I would say that because it's referenced, it still must have stood.
So we've talked before about letting the Bible tell us when it's shifting.
Right.
Figurative to literal. We try to decide that for ourselves, and we jump back and forth. It usually messes us up. So in the beginning of Revelation, he says there are 7 churches, and then he gives them names, which should tell us he's talking about a literal place. Even though we have all been figurative up to here, we are literally talking about the church in Ephesus.
Yeah.
Here, if he had said the temple of God that is in Jerusalem, now that'd be an example of the Bible giving us context to say let's switch to literal.
That's exactly right.
But instead, he leaves this as a place where God is worshipped.
Yeah, it's the holy city. I think it's referenced, the holy city. So I mean, you know the picture is of Jerusalem, but it's a figurative. It's a figurative location. So Matthew chapter 24, of course, we as you know, as we've discussed, we really leaned upon Daniel chapter 7 and 9. In Matthew 24, Jesus is not talking about the future world. He's talking about the destruction of the Jewish temple, making the end of the Jewish system. He's not talking about last days, blah, blah, blah. Ultimately, there are some that argue that the book of Revelation is really speaking on these same terms, and that it's leaning and discussing things. And in other words, Matthew chapter 24 is almost a preamble to the book of Revelation. And in that respect, again, that would hold to a preterist approach, and for some that would lend to them holding a early date view of, especially being that Matthew 24 uses apocalyptic language. Yeah, Matthew 24. And so does the book of Revelation. There's similar imagery with regards to, again, the judgment, all those types of things. I don't necessarily think that's a terribly strong view, but I get the point. I get that message, yes.
Is this the reason why those who believe the 80-70 doctrine, that they'll sometimes say the covenant was not established until the destruction of Jerusalem, because they're reading Revelation as the ending of the Jewish empire and the beginning of God's kingdom?
Yeah, so boy, that may be, realized eschatology. I mean, that may be one of their views of this. That they may hold that approach, but I think that they're so skewed everywhere else that it's kind of hard to put your foot on a platform there. But that's a good question. I don't know if I know the answer. If Revelation is about the future, as I mentioned before, the date doesn't matter as much, but ultimately, if you are a strict preterist, the early date's necessary. And that's a truth that has been verified by many people that I've studied and a lot of scholarship, and it creates a little bit of conundrum if you're a preterist. So a future view will require that the date of Revelation be after AD 70. Revelation doesn't come with a date or timestamp, obviously, so. And I'm not even saying I lean one way or the other. I think that ultimately I'm not an advocate. I'm not totally convinced of an early date. I think there's good evidence of it, but I'm not convinced of it. And there's going to be reasons why I'll explain as we go further. Again, some of these slides should be at the end that are at the front. So, so there is a flow of thought as I go through this, because this is the way I was thinking as I was preparing this PowerPoint presentation. And like I said, it's a little kind of off. So if the later date is true, then the preterist position can't hold up very well. The majority of the prophecies were fulfilled. Again, as we know, the majority of the prophecies fulfilled in the book of Revelation, Matthew 24, took place already, except the coming of the second coming. So again, this is key to that vision. Okay, so let's think about some late date arguments. And these are strong. Some of these are pretty strong. Some of these are not so strong. So several churches addressed had lost their ardor for Christ, because their love for Christ. Remember, you read the first couple chapters, we read that Jesus is judging them. I'm in your presence. All of them had particular problems, which according to some would better indicate this being a second-generation church instead of a first-generation church. Does that make sense? So I don't think anyone would argue that these churches did not exist during the reign of Nero. I think that some of them would suggest that they're very, very early church. I mean, they are like brand new churches that would probably not receive this type of judgment unless they had been around for a while. Does that make sense? I mean, I think you would follow that view. I do too. It makes sense that the condemnation of these cities, there is the apparent, the inference that they've been around for a while, that they're second generation. So, again, if you're in the reign of Domitian, then you're second generation. You're in the second generation. So if you're Nero, you're first generation church. So secondly, John calls Laodicea rich, but an earthquake almost leveled the city in AD 60. And so if they were written during the time of Nero, it would not have been a wealthy city. Again, a lot of supposition here, a lot of inference. There's no hardcore evidence. Again, it's inference. But again, it makes a point. If an earthquake ravaged the city of Laodicea in 60, even if you're 68, that's 10 years down the road, would they be referred to as a wealthy city? I don't know. It was wealthy because of trade. It was wealthy because of its position. So those things may not have changed. But again, point taken. The church of Smyrna was not founded until AD 64. Okay, again, I don't think that anyone would argue that it just wasn't, that the seven churches weren't there. But some people would argue that it couldn't have endured for a long time, according to Revelation 2:8. Again, it's a church that endured. So you guys are you guys on board? I'm not losing you here, am I? Everybody kind of following the line of thinking here. So here's the question. So, how do we know, what is the evidence that John wrote this in the reign of Domitian? Well, there's, in essence, there's a handful of early church fathers that connect John to Domitian. But here's the problem with that, and I'm going to read that passage to you in just a second. Almost all of them are following Irenaeus. So almost all of them are quoting and using Irenaeus as the source. And Irenaeus has the quote that we go to and that I have always referenced. And anybody asked me when the book of Revelation was written, well, I always would say, well, Irenaeus said it was written during the reign of Domitian. And I'll read to you that quote here in just a second. But so the Clement of Alexandria, Hippolytus, and others, and Jerome, probably not a good example because there is actually a passage of Jerome that connects John to Domitian. He also has another passage in one of his writings that connects him to Nero. So you can't really use Jerome because he kind of goes a little bit both ways there. Clement and many others, especially Eusebius, almost fully rely upon Irenaeus. So I'll get to that point in a minute. So here's some historical information. Irenaeus is the bishop of Lyon, which is in Asia Minor, by the way. That's in Asia Minor. Where are the seven churches of Asia? Asia Minor. So the fact that Irenaeus is a direct connection to John, because Irenaeus was a disciple of Polycarp, and Polycarp was a direct disciple of John. So you have a direct connection to John. That is good evidence to support the fact that Irenaeus did not make a mistake, or that he didn't misspeak when he said what he did about connecting John to Domitian. So here's the point. So the argument that the Roman Emperor Domitian was the one that exiled John to Patmos at the end of his reign, again, stated by a few church fathers, but they all almost rely upon Irenaeus. So again, it's easy. I'll show you a list here in a second. But it's easy to say, well, look at all these church fathers that supported the late date of the book of Revelation, but most all of them are following Irenaeus. So if Irenaeus doesn't have all of his information right, well, it's a domino effect. So you may be wondering why I would doubt Irenaeus. I'll share that in a minute with you. So the evidence of the 95 date, in other words, the late date, comes from this passage, written by Irenaeus, and again, in his book, Against Heresies, Book 5. So this is what he says. For that was seen not very long since, but almost in our day towards the end of Domitian reign. Again, referring to the apocalypse, the apocalyptic vision. He does not say the word John. He basically connects the apocalyptic vision to Domitian. This is the basis. This is the main line of argument. This is the reason why many people, including members of the church today, the most important connection, putting the book of Revelation at the end of the first century, not the beginning, not during the time of Nero. It's this passage. Okay? Now, so here's another line of thinking for those late date, the late date. Okay? Emperor worship described in chapters 13 through 20 matches Domitian. So again, the claim is that Domitian much more so claimed or desired worship than did Nero. Now, did Nero desire to be worshipped as a god? 100% yes. But again, it's a little bit of splitting hairs. I don't disagree with the fact that Domitian probably maybe did it on a more global stage. So that is an argument for a late date, that Domitian, again, proclaimed himself as God as described in the book of Revelation. The use of Babylon as a code word for a city in Revelation points to Rome. The early dates, again, say Babylon refers to Jerusalem. I just so happen to be one that, and again, I'm not going to call myself an early dater, so I'm not doing that. But I would lean more towards Babylon referencing Jerusalem because of some other factors. So I put this paragraph in there just to show you that you can't fit this, it doesn't fit perfectly. I would contend that some of the references to Babylon are references to Jerusalem. But anyway, that's the argument there. Ezra Baruch and others all refer to, so basically, some people way down the line referred to Rome as being Babylon. Lots of people have referred Rome to be Babylon. And I'm certainly not going to be dogmatic about that, but I do think that there are some connections to Jerusalem there that fit. So the Pauline epistles refer to several heretical groups, but never to the heresies that seem to be plaguing at the end of the century those in Asia Minor. In other words, Paul, why doesn't Paul and the apostles that lived during the time of Nero, and by the way, Nero most certainly put Paul to death. It was Nero who executed Paul. So the question is that if the book of Revelation was written pre-AD in the time of Paul, why didn't Paul articulate what was said about these churches in Asia? So again, that's the line of thinking. So a couple thoughts against an early date. So same thing again. These are arguments that would be in favor of a late date. So they would see at least partial fulfillment of the destruction of the temple in AD 70. The proponents of the early date read Revelation literally with its temple, and again, I don't do that. So again, this idea that Revelation 11 is referring to a literal Jerusalem, literal measurement, I don't follow that at all. The early dates insist that the number 666. So now this is very interesting. Follow along with me here, because my hope is to actually show you this paradigm, this very interesting concept, and it's the number 666 referencing Nero, and so if you take the Greek word Nero Caesar, and you put that in Hebrew, and what was common in some apocalyptic language, and is that you would each Hebrew letter represented a number. Okay, so that is a reality. That is, no one's making that up. So Aleph, which is what would be the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet, would be 1. Bait would be 2, and on and on. So if you do Hebrew of Nero Caesar, and I'm using that specifically because that's how you have to do it, Nero Caesar, you do come to 666. And it could be an interesting happenstance. I just so happen to, for those of you who know me, Dr. Stripling, who is a PhD archaeologist, a brilliant mind, he holds to that view vehemently and can articulate it much better than I could, but he's convinced that Nero represents 666. And there are many people that do. So it's not nonsense. And I'm not saying that I would support it, but it does take a couple of leaps. The most important leap is that why would you want to convert it to Hebrew? I mean, who's reading the book of Revelation? I mean, are they Hebrew readers? No, not really. So I think that's the first leap for me, is that why would you convert the Nero to Hebrew? Well, okay, that's one. And the other leap for me is that why Nero Caesar? Why just not Nero? You do Nero by itself, it doesn't add up. It actually comes close, but doesn't add up. You have to have Nero Caesar. So, but when you look at the formula, which I do not have here because that would take all class, when you look at the formula, it is startling how that just so happens to add up to 666. So as much as I admire really smart people, that doesn't mean I believe everything they say. So just because Dr. Stripling, who is one of the most brilliant guys I know, even though he believes that doesn't mean I'm going to believe it. But what it does make me think is that, and interestingly, by the way, Dr. Stripling would hold almost identical to our view of eschatology. So he is not a rapturist. He's not a tribulationist. And he believes that ultimately the book of Revelation is about that he would contend that again, most of what we would contend. Yet he holds to, he's fitting the pattern. He's a preterist who holds an early date. And that is a pattern. If you're a pretty strict preterist, you're going to, again, lean more towards that date. Okay. Another idea. Early daters insist, again, 666, okay, got that. Again, I think that's not overwhelmingly convincing to me, but so here's a chart that would be very convincing to someone looking at this on the surface. What do you see here? Yeah, right. And what's interesting is that the Syrianic inscription that's referenced here, that it says circa 508. That's not, it's second century. So and this is not a very good representation because there's lots of other Neronic dates, supporters of Neronic dates that are earlier than this. So this was I took this right off a page strongly advocating for the late date. And again, I haven't told you why many doubt Irenaeus, and I'm going to show you in a minute. But here we are. Okay, so Irenaeus. So Irenaeus was not. We have to understand that early church fathers were not inspired. They were regular dudes. Okay, they made mistakes. And even though we hold them in high esteem as being people who were as close to the action as possible, Irenaeus, in the same book that he connects the apocalypse to Domitian, basically advocates that Jesus' ministry was over 20 years and he lived to 50. Yes, and this is a guy who was just a generation away from John the Apostle. And it gets better. So now, I read this many times And then I read a lot of commentary on this, and everyone, there's no doubt that Irenaeus is most certainly claiming that Jesus lived to 50. So in other words, I'm not interpreting that in one way or the other. And again, all I'm showing you is that there's some problems with Irenaeus, his reliability. And what's interesting also is that Irenaeus, and again, against heresies, also claims that Peter and Paul, well, let me just put this in. Ancient and universally known church founded and organized at Rome. In other words, the church in Rome was established and organized by Peter and Paul. Now, is that true? It's not true. There's no evidence Peter actually ever even laid foot in Rome. Now, he could have, but we don't know that. So again, there's some questions about some of the historicity here. But here's the thing. So I'm to be fair to Irenaeus, okay? Irenaeus, again, lived in Asia Minor, okay? He knew what was going on. It's not like he was in a different country than John. Because, of course, John, by all accounts, died in Ephesus. Patmos, does anyone know where Patmos is? Patmos is off the coast of Asia Minor. It's not far from Ephesus. You get on a boat in Izmir, which is the port city, and you take a little boat trip up the way, and there it is. It's an island right there. So of all people, Irenaeus has tremendous credibility as being that close to Irenaeus, to John. Now, another line of thought is who would have been more likely to ultimately banish someone to Patmos versus kill them? Well, that's an easy one. Domitian would have much more likely banished someone than Nero. Nero would have, by all accounts, and again, this is a line of argument, Nero most likely, again, generically, would have been much more inclined to kill John. Why mess around? So, a line of argumentation is that Nero kills likely Peter and Paul. Why wouldn't he just kill John if John were living in that era instead of banish him? But Domitian, again, was known for banishing Christians. Again, I think that's a little oversimplistic because we know they probably did both. But again, it's our line of argument that I just wanted to bring up. Nowhere in history is there a record that says Nero banished Christians. Okay, that doesn't mean it didn't happen. But again, it's a line of thought. Several secular historians and early church writers specifically mention John was exiled. Again, we've already looked at those. But again, Tacitus, Tertullian, Eusebius, all are relying on Irenaeus. In other words, they're all quoting Irenaeus. They did not independently come up with that notion. Does that make sense? Okay. Now, this is something that Kyle and I talked about. It's very interesting. And I do think that this line of argument probably lands slightly in favor of a late date, and that is the extent of persecution. As you know, the book of Revelation is all about again, God bringing judgment upon those who have killed the martyrs. Remember those that are under the throne of God, those who are seeking out justice. There's persecution going on everywhere in the book of Revelation. So the question is under which ruler would there have been more persecution of Christians? Well, I told Kyle the other day, and I think I'm right in that I think that most scholars would contend that under the reign of Nero, there was a much harsh, vigorous persecution of Christians, as evidenced by, of course, 2 apostles being killed. However, Domitian's persecution of the faith was more than likely more widespread. Does it make sense? Okay, again, it's not really an argument you can measure but I do think that if you were to measure this, this would, I think, fall in the favor of a late date. Folks, I'm on slide 24 of slide 40. So, I hope that this was helpful. Did this give you some line of thinking? I mean, some line of sight. What I want to convey to you is that we don't have to be pigeonholed. It's okay, I think, to have a late date, which I think there's good evidence for that. But I don't think that you're a crazy loon, and I don't think that you're somehow off kilter if you hold to an early date, because here's the thing. Most preterists hold to an early date. And so it's okay either way. Now, next class, and I can't wait to listen to the tape, Kyle is going to present a similar approach to share some thoughts. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually, you can look at my other 20-something slides to see if you can glean anything from that mess. But no, I think it's going to be great to have, again, two different approaches, and that I don't think are going to be too dissimilar. But the bottom line is that this is God's Word, and ultimately, I think we all would contend that John wrote it, God inspired it, and it's valuable for us today. That's the most important thing. Okay. Any last questions or thoughts? Okay, thank you.